Hello, welcome to our global conversation. Our topic is Music Builds Community, and I'm joined by members of Ragmala Society here in Toronto. And I'm very pleased to welcome the three of you. Nishant Parekh, you just took over as president of Ragmala's of the society at the AGM last month, and you've been on the board since 2015. Nishant is also on the board at the Sai Mandir in Mississauga and is a managing director with Accenture Inc., a global management consulting and IT services company. Welcome. And we're also joined by Muhammad Kaki, and Kaki ji is the past president. He's been the past president for 8 years and remains on the Raag-Mala board, thankfully, and he's retired from a career in finance in 2010. And finally, but not least, we're joined by Aliya, who's been on the board since 2015 and is currently the treasurer and quarterback. She has recently completed a postgraduate degree in international development. Welcome, all of you. I'm looking forward to your conversation today around this idea of music building community. So, I'd like to start with you, Nishant, because you're the current president. Could you tell us a bit about Raag-Mala Society or Raag-Mala Music Society?
Now, you said something very profound. You said music builds community. And that is so true for Raag-Mala, because if you see our 40 years of history, our mission has been a single, mission that, we want to weave this Raag Sangeet into the fabric of Canadian culture. Even though our music is universal, it is loved by and promoted by Canadians from all parts of the world. Especially, we are one of the shining star, example of, Raga Sangeet based charity organization in North America. And for 40 years, we have been, run by volunteers, supported by committed benefactors, patrons, and other donors. And if it's something very interesting is we don't have a paid staff. This is all purely out of love for music. And when you see our concerts, it's not just, Indian diaspora, but we have many Canadians, many different parts of, citizens and, ethnicity come to our concerts. And that's something we are very proud of. And we are also very fortunate to, have a great partner in you and Aga Khan Museum. Our artists and audiences equally love the venue, the stage, the sound, your team and everything. So we sincerely thank you for the support. And also we are fortunate to have support from Ontario Arts Council. Now, of course, as we expand, and, we are sharing to this new digital era, we want more funding and we are looking for more support from various funding agencies and foundations. And we want to continue build on the past success that Magan Bhai and Muhammad has built. We have a very strong foundation that our new board is going to take forward.
Well, that's really cool, and thank you for talking about the relationship with the museum, because I think that we've benefited profoundly as a new institution in a city where you've been active as a society for 40 years and have developed not only relationships with artists from around the world, especially from India, but also with different communities and the different diverse South Asian communities themselves, because, there's not just one South Asian community. So, the diversity that you speak of is between different cultures, but also within what we might see as a big culture, there's that diversity. So I found that was really an interesting point. I wanted to ask you, Aliya, if what the experience has been like for Raag-Mala during the pandemic. I mean, your organization has thrived over the years on presenting the live experience. I mean, that's what sets you apart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we had our season opener in 2020. In April, planned at the Aga Khan Museum. I think that sold out a couple of months in advance. We were all very excited about it. We had, people, the day we announced it was sold out, we had people calling, asking for 25 tickets and nope, not available. And then COVID hit. and yeah, so we had really hoped to, I think we left it down right to the wire. You guys at the museum had hopes that we would be able to have it, and then we realized it wasn't happening. And then as an organization, we sort of sat down and said, okay, what do we do now? As many organizations, yourselves at the museum as well, everybody was scrambling, trying to figure out what to do. As an organization, Raag-Mala decided we weren't willing to compromise on quality because our audience has come to expect that. So we were only going to go forward with any virtual events if we were able to do so without that compromise or compromise on quality. So we began, if you remember, with having 3 broadcasts of events that had been at the museum in 2019. So those were, I think Raag-Mala itself, we kind of, we were trying to navigate the digital sphere. So we did like a Facebook watch party as we were trying to figure things out. But I know the museum made those available on their YouTube channel. And I think the one nice thing about that was that it was available for free. So, if people who weren't familiar with Raag-Mala or with any classical music, it was available to them to kind of get a teaser, And then beyond that, because of the relationships that Raag-Mala has built through the years, opportunities sort of came to us. So we were the principal sponsor for the Swar Sunmat Festival in Kolkata, India, which is one of the most prestigious annual festivals there. So they had 36 different performances from November to February of this year, and that we were actually able to make that available for a lifetime to our benefactors and patrons, which was very exciting for us. And this was the first opportunity, because things went digital, for us to participate in something in India, so participate in something abroad. So we've really begun to go global digitally, which is very exciting for us. This is something very new. And in 2021, we are very excited to be a sponsor for the Sarabari Roy Chowdhury Festival in Calcutta. So this is going to be the first time that we're going to be recording Canadian artists and having them broadcast in India. So this is something very, very new, very different. It's going to be a mixture of musicians, instrumental, vocals. So some Arnab Chakrabarti and Sarod, with Abbas Jan Muhammad on tabla, and then Andrew Kay on saxophone, and Pankaj Mishra on sarangi. And we were very excited to be able to include Pankaj Mishra, because he's also a very recent immigrant. Like he immigrated to Canada right before the pandemic hit. He had this lineup of concerts arranged, and everything just kind of got canceled, and this is affecting people's livelihood. So we were very excited to be able to include him. We realized we have so much local talent here. We should be helping to give them exposure both here and abroad as much as we can. So in essence, although we were sort of hit by a curveball at the start of the pandemic, there have been many silver linings. We've had opportunities we would have never even thought possible previously by going digital. And we've also found that there have been people who haven't been able to access concerts for a number of years due to mobility and whatnot, even within the GTA. So they've all of a sudden, I can attend concerts now, right? Or people who can't sit through, because Indian classical music concerts, they're long. So if they can't sit through a concert, they can watch from their homes at their leisure. They can pause, go back to it, do that sort of thing. So we found, in addition to being able to expand our audience to a larger sphere geographically, we can even make it more accessible to people within the GTA, which is really exciting.
But one of the things you just spoke about that really struck me is that for the first time you're able to present, or for the first time you are presenting Canadian artists at a festival that's international. And I wanted to turn to you, Mohammed, as someone who has been with this organization for many years. Tell us about, the past. Could you have done a presentation like this? Say the technology was there 40 years ago? Because I think this connects to this idea of how community is built, right, as well.
Absolutely. I mean, it's 40 years of relationships, really, that we're talking about, Amirali. Uh, Nishant mentioned Magan by Ambassador, who was our founding president, but he was from East Africa, from Tanzania, a Gujarati fellow, and when he came here via the UK, was an architect. But then, he was met by people like Raya Bidae, Rudy Wall, John Campana, Govinda Durga Pachapurkar, and together they got together, as you said, from different communities within the greater South Asian umbrella to offer the first concerts. And I wouldn't have imagined really us doing a concert in India as on a digital way. Clearly, from how you framed your question, was that, but. But it's been through these years that we've had these relationships built through. The first concert was actually held in a basement. This was in a basement in Markham, with in the home of Asha and Victor Gadkar in Markham. Now, I wasn't at that concert, but Raya Bidaya was there, so that's how I found out about it. And it was a concert with Hari Prasad Chaurasia and Zakir Hussain. And Raya tells me that when Hari Prasad and Zakir, they saw that this was going to be in a basement, their faces fell because they weren't expecting to be performing. But pretty soon there were over 100 people who were there. Both Hari Prasad and Zakir Bhai were thrilled with the concert, and they play way beyond what their allotted time was. So it was a spectacular success. And I think that gave the impetus to people like Magan Bhai, Dinesh Gandhi, and the rest to form Raag-Mala. That was the takeoff. But then we had many, many memorable concerts. And I've really a couple of memories that I want to share with you, which is my greatest musicians is Vilayat Khan and Bismillah Khan, the sitar maestro and the Shehnai maestro. And in fact, one of my favorite pieces is a Jugalbandi. Now, unfortunately, we didn't have a Jugalbandi, but the music you might hear just now is a Jugalbandi that the two of them have performed on an album, which was one of my favorites. We had them at Raag-Mala many, many years ago. I remember Vilayat Khan's concert was, he played the Alap in Rag Yaman for over an hour. And then he stopped playing the Alap and he said, I have to give my tabla player a chance to perform with me. So it was that sort of a magical concert. I remember Bismillah Khan playing, that Gunjuti Shehnai song, Tere Suror Mere Geet, on Shehnai. And he was playing with us on the little finger, as we say, but those were the kind of concerts at that time. And then we've had people like Lakshmi Shankar, artists like Lakshmi Shankar. She sang for the Gandhi, film Gandhi, the most beautiful bhajan that Mahatma Gandhi loves. What I remember about that concert is that Raya Bidae and Arvind Devbhakta, they were the two Canadians who were accompanying her, not just in Toronto, but they toured with her around the US, because at that time there were more Indians established, I think, in Toronto than they were they were more widespread in the US. But Toronto has had Indian music since a very long time. And we mentioned Magan Ambassador as being our first founding president, but we also had people like Tapas Mukherjee and his family, and there were people like Razia Rais and Dr. Prasad, who were so instrumental in moving Raag-Mala through the 80s and the 90s.
Thank you, Mohammed. That's I think we could spend hours talking about the different concerts that Raag-Mala has presented over the years in various places. And I think it's very poignant that the first performance would have been in a basement, because that tradition of being at somebody's home and performing, is such a strong part of how that community builds. It's kind of like the Newfie kitchen parties. In many South Asian communities, it's not unusual to hear live music being performed in people's homes at different scales by different caliber of artists. And so I think that's a wonderful thing that many different South Asian communities have brought with them to the places they have moved in the South Asian diaspora around the world. So I wanted to ask you, Nishant, now, about what Raag-Mala has been up to recently. Mohammed's spoken about the earlier days and the past, but what are some of the highlights you can describe from recent times?
Certainly, Amirali, and thanks, Mohammed, for walking us through that glorious past. But I'm glad you asked this question, Amirali, because it's not just those great maestros, but even recently, since I joined Raag-Mala, I've been fortunate enough to see some of these fantastic artists that I only dreamt of seeing them, right? Dr. Prabhat, right? We are, Pandit Buddharitya Mukherjee, he's like a living legend in Sitar today. Pandit Ajay Chakravarti, everybody knows him, right? Vidushi Ashwini Bide Deshpande, Ustad Sahid Parvez, Pandit Tejendra Majumdar. These are all shining stars. They are at their peak today. And I remember so many concerts, particularly I will call out Dr. Prabhat Reji's concert at Glen Gould. When she concluded, there were tears in everybody's eyes. It was again a sold out concert. And same thing with Buddharitya Ji when he performed at Aga Khan Museum. I still cannot forget that Yaman and Chandni Kedar, So we have had some of the best performances, but even if I talk about more younger artists, such as, Wasim Ahmed Khan, Kaushiki Chakravarti, Bhunesh Komkali, we have presented them also. We have presented even Canadian artists and North American artists, such as Warren Sanders, John Feinberg, Ramnik Singh Ji, Neeraj Prem, Jonathan K. So, going back to your point of, music build community, we have brought all these people, various Gharanas from India, people who are, for example, Ramnik Ji is, from Indore Gharana, right? Has Ustad Amir Khan, and she is now carrying for the torch, and she has presented for us. So we feel extremely proud that, okay, we have brought this fantastic, constellation of stars, I would say. And another thing I want to comment on the community building, something that, differentiates Raag-Mala from other organizations is, we operate at a very human level. We don't operate as just an organizer. It's not a transactional relationship. Mohammed makes sure that every year he goes to India and he meets with artists. That's again the foundation that he's building relationship. People knowing about Raag-Mala, agreeing to perform for us. I was fortunate, when I went to Bombay several years ago, when I went to meet Prabhaji at her home, I got a very warm welcome. We spent a lot of good quality time together discussing music. It was like a dream come true. This relationship, which is what making Raag-Mala very unique. And when they come here, we make sure that apart from the main concert, we make best use of their time. So, for example, when Buddharitya Ji was here, we held a concert at Aga Khan Museum. But the next day, he had a baitak for benefactors and patrons and donors. Same thing we did with Manjusha Patil. When Aarti Ji came, she taught some of her students here in Canada. And another thing that we have done very creative and innovative is, with some of these artists, we have even recorded them. We have hired a studio and recorded some music, like such as when Uday Bawalkarji came here, we recorded him explaining, Drupad nuances and various bandishes. Same thing we did with Pandit Partho Sarthi, Arti. So what we do is, we make sure that when they are here, we engage with them in all possible level, and not just the audience of Raag-Mala, but broader community also can benefit from that.
Yeah, I think that leads us to talking about the future. But I also wanted to sort of, point out that what strikes me is that we, the three of you are really intergenerational, an intergenerational group. And, for an organization to survive, as a volunteer-run organization for 40 plus years, wow, it's good to see that passing of the torch, and that intergenerational, that someone young, Aliya, is, into this amazing tradition of music. So, perhaps you could talk a little bit about ways in which you're deepening the role, because what I'm hearing is some excitement from this pandemic experience, but also from having a pause maybe and looking back at the organization's work and how it wants to move forward.
For sure. And, like for me personally, like I never really got into music in terms of learning it. I grew up going to Raag-Mala concerts, I think I don't think I was even walking my first Raag-Mala concert. So, technically, I think I was at a Raag-Mala concert before Nishant had ever been at a Raag-Mala concert, right? In terms of age, obviously, like Muhammad would have been there at the beginning. I wasn't born yet, so I couldn't have been, but I grew up going to all these concerts, and now I'm here, right? But there are youth who are very much into the music. Unfortunately, they haven't really come out to concerts in the way that we would have liked. That was the one thing, pre-pandemic, we had started giving student tickets, and we were actually finding that those were being used, they're being sold out. So I think for some, it's a price point issue, right? For us, a $30, $40 ticket isn't too much, especially for what you pay for something, like a big pop artist or something like that, right?
Is North Indian classical music Canadian?
It's getting mainstream. I would say that it's getting mainstream. And like I was going to say too, our obviously our main stage concerts are still our core, but to expand our initiatives, we are doing, we have been doing actually for the last couple of years, we've been doing lecture demonstrations in schools and in libraries. And for those, we have been, we're a mixture of artists, but a couple of them have been younger musicians, particularly at schools, because they're more relatable, I think, as well, So for the one, and I was really bummed that I missed this, but they play, so it was Tabla and Taos, I think, and it was just Meet and Hardeep Chana.
Yeah.
And they actually played, so they did, for the younger kids, they just did a performance, or for the whole school, they did a performance. This was at a junior school. And then I think for the older grades, they did a little bit of a lecture demonstration. But towards the end, they actually played Star Wars, the theme, So there's things like that where you have to have kids realize that this is, you can do that Western music on these instruments, right? Like that, I think that's how you get them more engaged and involved. And, or, in that case too, like they came up to the stage and they were looking at the instruments, and, obviously they're fragile instruments, so you have to be careful, but they let them, to an extent kind of fiddle with them, and that's their exposure. They're not going to get exposure any other way, right?
Yeah. I think that, the teaching is really important, and making accessible, and that sort of work is always there. It always continues. I think it's always been there, but I think you answered that question. Is this Canadian? Yeah. I mean, there are teachers, there are students, there are people who love this music, and increasingly they're from different, not only cultural backgrounds, but I think the youth, one of the trends we've seen is family-friendly, kid-friendly theater. The theater world does special performances, that's where you can be a little less stuffy about it. And I'm also wondering about traditional contexts. I mean, I know that there's that tradition of the formal high classical performance, and there's a way to be respectful in those spaces. But there's also, a tradition of an informality around those performances in the places where they originate, where, families, yeah, baby can cry sometimes, you probably, if they're doing it during the alap, you probably will leave the room, right? Or you might not come in until, the percussion has begun or something. So there are, ways in which, because I'm thinking about relaxed performances at the museum as well, and how do we make those possible? And, it may mean that an artist does a shorter 35-minute set that's really made for people who are new to the music.
Yeah, if I can say a couple of things here, Amirali. So, we are talking about familiarity first. And I think the school talks, and to a lesser extent, some of the concerts we've had during Nuit Blanche, which are more accessible, quote unquote, lighter music. But that is very important. And that said, Raag-Mala's, the volunteer energy is there, and the passion is there, and the donor base is there, and the benefactors and patrons come to us for the real thing. And the real thing is when you can bring Ajoy Chakravarti, Pandit Ajoy Chakravarti, Pandit Buddhaditya Mukherjee, Ustad, Shujat Hussain Khan, and and that's the truth, and that's why we get excited about that music. But going back to your question about is Indian classical music Canadian music? So I have a question for you. Is Prokofiev's Peter and the Wolf Western classical music? It's like, okay, it's a very light version of it, and you take your children to listen to that at the Toronto Symphony Orchestra, and you have all the TSO playing that, and so what they're building is a fan base of people who get familiar with the music. And unfortunately, I don't think we have that aspect to classical music. And I don't like calling it Indian classical music, because the music really spans the subcontinent. So we're talking about people in Pakistan, Sri Lanka to a certain extent, that's more South Indian, but Bangladesh and India, and people from East Africa, where we're listeners to it. So I like to call it Rag Sangeet.
Yeah.
But eventually, I hope that the phrase will be that it is classical music, and no one asks, is it Indian classical music or Western classical music?
And by Canadian, I guess I was referring to the fact that, there's now generations, there's a generation of musicians, of Canadian musicians, those who are born in Canada, no matter where they've come from, who this is part of their lives. They've been influenced by it. No doubt many people have seen and attended your concerts over the years, been influenced, maybe developing an interest in studying, if they're musicians themselves, or listening. And I've seen that with my own eyes just in the short few years that we've been presenting concerts together at the museum, where I have seen an increase in the diversity of the audiences. And that makes me so happy, because, and I do think that, music does build community. And again, it takes people, it takes leadership, it takes vision, it takes people working in the community. And on behalf of all Canadians, and GTA in particularly, I want to thank the three of you for the work that you do and the beauty that you bring into our lives. Mohammed, Nishant, Aliya, thanks so much for joining us today. And I hope that all of you out there have enjoyed this global conversation.